He was the saddest dog in the shelter, head down, ribs showing, labeled unadoptable. No one gave him a second glance until one man stopped, locked eyes with him, and whispered, "I choose you." What followed stunned the shelter staff and brought millions to tears. You won't believe this transformation. It was a cold and overcast afternoon when the doors of the city shelter creaked open. Families bustled in, excited voices echoing down the sterile hallway. Kennels lined the walls, filled with dogs barking, tails wagging, each one hopeful for a new beginning. Except for one. In the far corner, behind rusted metal bars, a lone German shepherd sat silently. His eyes, glassy and sunken, stared at nothing and everything at once. The weathered wooden sign dangled above his kennel door. It read in bold, cracking letters, "Unadoptable." To most, it was a warning. To him, it was a sentence. His name was never used by staff, just a number etched into a clipboard. No one visited his cage. No one knelt beside him. His only companions were shadows and silence. Some said he had been abused. Others whispered that he had turned on his former owner. A few thought he had simply given up on life. Whatever the truth, it didn't matter. People passed him by every day without so much as a glance. Children pointed excitedly at puppies nearby, while parents gently steered them away from the dark corner with the dangerous one. And yet, behind those weary eyes was something more. Not anger, not aggression, just pain and a desperate, flickering hope. As if, even after all the abandonment and fear, a small part of him still believed someone, anyone, might look past the label and finally see him for what he truly was, a soul waiting to be saved. The man hadn't planned to stop that day. He was driving past the shelter when something, he couldn't explain what, urged him to turn in. His name was James. Middle-aged, quiet, with a weathered face and kind eyes that had seen both love and loss. A retired firefighter, he'd lived alone since his wife passed 2 years ago. The house was too quiet now, too still. James told the front desk staff he was just looking. He strolled past the excited puppies, the tail waggers pressed against the glass. He smiled politely, but kept walking. Then he saw the cage in the corner and stopped cold. The dog didn't bark, didn't move, just stared. But something in his eyes, something wounded and raw, grabbed James by the chest. He took a slow step closer. The sign above read, "Unadoptable." James tilted his head and knelt. A staff member appeared quickly. "Sir, that one's not available," she warned gently. "He's been through a lot." James didn't look away. "So have I," he said softly. Against the staff's advice, James filled out the papers. An hour later, he walked out with the dog no one wanted. No leash tugging, no tail wagging. Just two broken souls, walking side by side into something unknown. The first night was quiet, too quiet. The German shepherd, now renamed Shadow, stood motionless just inside James's front door. His nails clicked softly against the hardwood. As he paced in circles, eyes scanning every corner like a prisoner unsure of his freedom, James left the crate open, food untouched in the kitchen, water untouched by the door. Shadow didn't eat, didn't sleep. He hid beneath the dining table, flinching at every creak in the floor or shift of wind through the windows. James didn't push. He simply moved through his routines, speaking gently now and then, letting the dog see that the silence here wasn't dangerous. It was peaced. On the second day, a loud crash from the street sent Shadow cowering into a corner, trembling uncontrollably. James sat down on the floor beside him, not touching, just being there. "You're safe now," he whispered. That night, as James settled into bed, he heard the softest sound, pause on the wood. A warm weight settled beside him on the floor. Shadow didn't climb onto the bed, but he laid close, eyes blinking slowly in the dark. That it wasn't much, but it was trust. And for James, it was everything. Days turned into weeks, and little by little, the walls around Shadow began to crack. He followed James from room to room, always a few steps behind, silent, watchful, like a shadow that had finally found its light. James spoke to him often, not expecting answers, but offering comfort in every word. One afternoon, James tossed an old tennis ball across the yard. Shadow didn't chase it. He just watched. But the next day, when James tried again, the dog took one uncertain step forward, then another. Finally, he picked up the ball, carrying it back like a fragile treasure. The small victories added up. Shadow no longer flinched at the sound of the kettle. He wagged his tail, just slightly, when James came home. They walked together in quiet parks, where Shadow could breathe without fear. The world no longer seemed like a threat. Then, one night, as James walked down an alley shortcut home, a man lunged from the shadows. Before James could react, Shadow exploded into action, his body a blur of protection. The attacker fled, startled by the dog's fierce growl. James stood frozen, heart racing. Shadow circled back and sat beside him, alert but calm. In that moment, James knew Shadow wasn't just healing, he was protecting. It started subtly. On a quiet morning, James sat sipping his coffee when Shadow suddenly stood, staring at him with sharp, unblinking eyes. He let out a low whine and nudged James's leg, pacing in tight circles. "What's wrong, boy?" James asked, puzzled. Then the dizziness hit. The mug slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. James collapsed against the counter, gasping for breath. Shadow barked, loud and frantic, then dashed to the door and back again, over and over. Somehow, he managed to paw open James's phone from the table. When the paramedics arrived, they said one thing over and over. If he hadn't alerted someone, it might have been too late. The doctor later explained it had been a minor cardiac event. Shadow had sensed it before. It even struck. James was stunned. He began watching Shadow more closely, noticing how the dog reacted to changes in his breathing, posture, even stress. A medical trainer confirmed it. Shadow had a natural gift. Dogs like him could be trained as medical alert companions. But Shadow? He didn't need much training. He already knew. Instinctively, James signed them up for certification. Shadow passed with flying colors. Suddenly, the unadoptable dog became something else entirely, a guardian. A lifeline. Local news caught wind of the story. A headline ran, "Dog once labeled dangerous saves owner's life." James didn't care for attention, but he looked at Shadow with awe. The dog who once trembled in silence now stood proudly at his side, a true hero. The news story spread like wildfire. A local journalist featured Shadow and James in a segment titled "Second Chances, the Dog Who Saved a Life." Viewers were captivated by the transformation, from fearful shelter reject to certified medical alert dog. Comments flooded in. Emails. Messages. People wanted to know more. Some even visited the shelter just to see where Shadow came from. The shelter staff watched the story air with tears in their eyes. Many remembered the day they considered putting Shadow on the euthanasia list. Now, he was a community hero. A framed photo of him was placed near the entrance, right under a news sign. "Every soul deserves a second chance." James, ever humble, waved off praise. "He saved me before I ever saved him," he said simply. But Shadow seemed to know. He walked taller now, met people's eyes. His tail wagged freely at a local school assembly. Children crowded around to pet him. One little boy, scared of dogs, reached out timidly. Shadow lowered his head, calm and gentle. The boy smiled. That was Shadow's power now. Not just protection, but connection. From a forgotten cage in the corner to the hearts of hundreds, he was no longer unadoptable, he was unforgettable.